It was the night before the world tour announcement. Outside, the world was already celebrating. Fans were counting days. Headlines were ready to explode. But inside the practice room, everything was silent. No music, no jokes. No one even looked at the mirror. One member sat on the floor, staring at nothing. Another kept checking his phone, then putting it down again. Everyone felt it. Something wasn't right. Then someone finally spoke. "What if we can't do this anymore?" The room froze. That single sentence broke everything they had been holding inside. "We're exhausted. We smile on stage, but we're falling apart inside. Is this really the life we wanted?" For the first time, the word ending was not a rumor. It was right there in the room. And that was the cruel part. They were at the top of the world. But inside, they were closer than ever to losing everything. Then, a phone vibrated. A short message from someone who believed in them more than they believed in themselves. No one said anything at first, until one member slowly stood up and said, "Let's do it just one more time." That moment changed everything, because this wasn't about a tour anymore. It was about a choice that could destroy them or turn them into legends. And the next day, the lights turned on. The crowd screamed. But no one in that arena knew what it took for BTS to stand on that stage. The silence didn't last long. Once the door was opened, everything came out at once. "We haven't rested in years. Every smile feels forced now. I don't even recognize myself anymore." Voices grew louder, then quieter, then completely raw. Someone laughed bitterly and said, "People think we have everything but they don't see this." Another member looked away, fighting tears. "If we stop now, we disappoint everyone. But if we keep going we might lose ourselves." That's when the argument really began. Are we doing this for the fans? Or because we're scared to stop? No one had an easy answer. The room felt smaller, heavier, like the walls were closing in. One member finally said what everyone was afraid to admit. "What if this tour is the last one?" No one interrupted. No one denied it. Because for a moment it felt real, very real. They talked about injuries, about anxiety, about nights when sleep never came. They talked about pressure, about expectations, about being symbols instead of people. And then someone whispered, "I don't want us to end like this." That sentence changed the tone. The anger faded. The blame disappeared. What was left was fear. Fear of breaking apart. Fear of letting go. Fear of a future without the seven of them together. They sat there for a long time. No cameras, no staff. Just seven people deciding their fate. And that's when one member said, "If this really ends one day, I want to know we gave everything." The room went quiet again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of resolve. The room stayed quiet. Not the kind of silence filled with anger, but the kind that comes after everything has been said. Someone took a deep breath and looked around. "No matter what happens, we didn't come this far alone." That was the first time that night. Someone mentioned us again. Another member nodded slowly. "We started as 7 kids with nothing. No guarantees, no promises, just each other." Memories began to surface. The tiny practice room, the cheap microphones, the empty seats they once performed for. Back then, quitting would have been easy. But they didn't quit. One member spoke quietly, almost to himself. "If we stop now because we're afraid, we'll regret it forever." That hit hard. Not like a shout, like the truth. They weren't afraid of failing. They were afraid of failing together. Then someone stood up, not dramatically, just slowly. "If this tour breaks us," he said, "then we face it together." Another stood up, then another. No cheers, no applause. Just 7 people, back on their feet. They didn't promise perfection. They didn't promise forever. They promised honesty. "If one of us falls, we stop. We talk. We don't pretend." For the first time that night, someone smiled. Not for cameras, not for fans, for real. The decision was made. This tour wouldn't be about proving anything to the world. It would be about proving something to themselves. And in that quiet room, without realizing it, BTS didn't just save a tour, they saved each other. The decision didn't end the night. It started a new one. No one said, "Let's rest." No one checked the time. Instead, someone reached for the speaker. Music filled the room, soft at first, then louder. They didn't rehearse the hardest choreography. They didn't aim for perfection. They started with the basics, steps they had done 1,000 times before. But this time, every move meant something. "If we're doing this," one member said, We do it our way. They talked between breaks about limits, about boundaries, about finally saying no when it hurt too much. They made rules they had never dared to say out loud. No hiding pain, no pretending strength, no leaving anyone behind. It wasn't a contract, it was a promise. As the night turned into early morning, sweat covered the floor. Breathing grew heavier, but something felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, they weren't chasing expectations. They were chasing honesty. One member laughed and said, "We look terrible right now," and everyone laughed. Real laughter, not the kind you practice. The sun began to rise outside the windows. Exhausted, they sat on the floor together. No speeches, no dramatic endings. Just 7 people, side by side. Someone finally said, "Whatever happens out there tonight stays with us." They nodded, because they knew when the world would see the lights, the stages, the cheers, they would remember this room, this night, the moment they chose each other over everything else. The day had finally arrived. World Tour, Day 1. Outside the venue, fans were already lining up. Some had waited all night. Some had traveled across countries. Inside the building, the noise disappeared. Backstage felt unreal. Makeup brushes moved quietly. Stylists whispered. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. No one joked this time. Each member was alone with his thoughts. One adjusted his in-ear monitor, hands slightly shaking. Another closed his eyes, breathing slowly. Someone stared at the floor, repeating the choreography in his head. This wasn't fear of the stage. They had faced bigger crowds before. This was different. This was fear of breaking the promise they made the night before. A staff member peeked in. 10 minutes. The words hit harder than expected. 10 minutes until the lights. 10 minutes until the screams. 10 minutes until everything became real. They gathered in a small circle. No cameras. No managers speaking. Just them. One member looked around and said, "No matter what happens out there, remember last night." Another nodded. "If something feels wrong, we stop." A hand reached out, then another. 7 hands together, not as idols, not as symbols, as people. Someone whispered, "Let's enjoy this even if it hurts." The lights outside dimmed. The crowd roared. Their names echoed through the stadium. This was the moment. Everything they argued about, everything they almost lost, everything they promised, it all led here. They took one final breath together, and stepped toward the stage. The moment their feet touched the stage, everything exploded. Lights burst open, the screen flashed, and the crowd screamed their names. A sound so loud it felt like the ground itself was shaking. For a split second, time slowed down. One member scanned the audience. Thousands of faces, thousands of lights, all waiting. The music started. The first beat hit, and suddenly, their bodies moved on instinct. No thinking, no doubt, just rhythm, just muscle memory, just years of pain and practice turning into motion. As they danced, something changed. The tension they carried backstage began to melt away. A smile appeared, then another. Real smiles, the kind you can't fake. One member caught another's eye mid-performance. They nodded, not for the choreography, for reassurance. "I'm here. We're still here." The crowd sang along, every word, every note, louder than the speakers. It hit them then. They weren't carrying this alone. They never were. As the song ended, they stood there, breathing hard. The cheers didn't stop. They looked out at the sea of fans, and felt it. That connection, that reason. For a moment, all the fear from the night before disappeared, not because it was gone, but because it was worth it. This wasn't just a performance. It was proof that their choice had meaning. And as the next song began, they knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened after this, they had made the right decision to step on that stage together. The stage lights went dark. The cheers slowly faded into echoes. Backstage, the noise returned. Staff moved quickly. Towels were passed around. Water bottles opened one after another. But the members didn't talk right away. They sat down, breathing heavily, sweat dripping, hands still shaking. One member finally broke the silence. "I thought I was going to cry out there." Another laughed softly. "I almost did." Not from exhaustion, from relief. They had made it through the first night. Someone leaned back against the wall and said, "Last night I really thought this could be the end." No one denied it, because they all felt the same. One member looked down at his hands. "I was scared I'd mess everything up." Another replied immediately, You didn't. You never do. That reassurance mattered more than the applause outside. They talked honestly now, about how close they came to breaking, about how heavy the pressure had become, about how much they needed that night in the practice room. One member said quietly, "If we hadn't talked, I don't think I'd be standing here right now." The room went still. Not uncomfortable, just real. Another member nodded. "We don't say this enough, but I'm grateful. Grateful for the arguments, grateful for the honesty, grateful they didn't walk away." A staff member peeked in again. "Great job tonight." They smiled. But this time, the smiles weren't for praise. They were for each other. Someone stood up and stretched. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow we do it again." Not because they had to, because they chose to. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel terrifying. It felt possible. The world would remember the tour, the sold-out stadiums, the records, the headlines. But this story wasn't really about any of that. It was about a night no one saw, a quiet room, 7 voices, and a choice. They didn't choose perfection. They didn't choose comfort. They didn't choose what was easy. They chose honesty. They chose to speak when silence felt safer, to stay when leaving seemed simpler, to trust each other one more time. That choice didn't erase the pressure. It didn't remove the pain. It didn't promise forever. What it did was give meaning to every step forward. Every performance after that night carried something deeper, not just talent, not just discipline, but truth. When fans screamed their names, they weren't just cheering idols on a stage. They were standing with 7 people who almost walked away and decided not to. Legends aren't born in spotlight moments. They're born in rooms like that one. Late at night, when no one is watching, and long after the lights fade, after the tour ends, after the noise is gone. That choice remains, because in the end, BTS didn't become legends by never breaking. They became legends by choosing to stay together when breaking felt inevitable.